I think it's because I hadn't yet asked. I'm so sorry. Is it okay with everyone that I record? Okay, am I recording now? Did you all get your recording? Okay, and so thank you to Elfie Gabriel, Katie Mudd, to TCNJ Program Assistant, Department of English, Michelle Ordini, without whom we would not be able to do really anything. To the officers and members of our local chapter at TCNJ and our Eastern Region student leaders, Albie Hayes and Mary Wang, who are both here, and all of our registrants. Thank you so much for coming. And so today, so I'm going to stop the share. Our session today at 11 is on the future of service and chapter engagement. And we've got 3 people who I want to thank, who have decided to come and talk about projects that they've worked on with their previous at their institutions. And so we've got Enrico Bruno, who is visiting assistant, is it visiting or is assistant professor at St. Joseph's University in, is it technically in Philadelphia? Okay. And Diane Steinberg, who is my co-sponsor or advisor at TCNJ, and who is also the president of the board of Sigma Tau Delta, and Jessica Abolafia, a student at TCNJ. And so I'm going to sort of put the spotlight on all 3 of them, and I'm going to ask, starting with Enrico, or actually I've wanted to say this and waited for a number of years, Professor Bruno. I would like him to get us started talking about the community engagement project that he led, and then Jessica and Diane can talk about their projects as well.
All right, I'll need to have a screen sharing privileges.
Okay. All right, I just activated it. Let me know if that works.
Okay. Yes, that did work. All right. Well, actually, all right, there you go. All right, so I will be sharing this presentation about a project I did at my previous institution as soon as I can get down here to the, there you go. All right, so as Dr. Still mentioned, I'm Dr. Enrico Bruno. I am a visiting assistant professor and assistant director of the Writing Center at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. And I have become the Sigma Tau Delta advisor just 2 weeks ago. So I don't have experience yet hosting community service projects with my chapter, but I just came from the University of Iowa, where I had a project I did with my students in an English course that I want to talk about, because I think it can serve as a model of the kind of partnerships we can use in Sigma Tau Delta as well. So just as a little bit of a brief background information, in the spring of 2021, just earlier this year, I taught a course for English majors called Queer of Color Literature and Theory from 1950s to present. And the course featured writing all by queer writers from global majority races. And this is just a few of the selections we had on our syllabus. And the goal was to not only talk about these texts as we would in any English class by talking about plot and characterization and reading the text themselves, but very much also to think about the way that the texts were rooted in history. And so, right, when we discussed Audre Lorde's Zammy and her autobiography, we talked about the feminist movement and the way that queer Black feminists were often excluded from that movement, and then, right, wrote their own rules and out of necessity had their own movement. And my students often come into that class thinking that Stonewall was the first ever gay rebellion or something. So I talked to them about what happened before Stonewall that might have led up to it, and then what kind of protests happened after Stonewall. And here there's a photo in the top left of Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. We talk about the way that trans activists were excluded from these circles often. And then, you know, when we're reading Randall Keenan's 1989 novel, A Vegetation of Spirits, the novel itself doesn't actually deal with the AIDS crisis directly, but we talk about the way the text comes out of that crisis and the kind of silence equals death motto that was coined by activists at the time. In addition to the focus on history, though, I also wanted to make the course very focused on community, more specifically. So when we read Lord, we talked about the burgeoning lesbian bar scene in the 1950s in New York City. And we didn't just read her book, but we read articles and other sources from people in that period to think about the way her text came out of that community. Same thing with the other text, right? Whether it was Paris as a site of where a queer expatriate was living, or the US-Mexico border, or queer studies, which is studies of queerness in the US South. I always made sure to keep our focus on community. So for the final project for the class, I really wanted my students to, in some way, engage with the local community of Iowa City, which is where the University of Iowa is located. So in just brainstorming of how I might do that, I ended up just Googling, and I found out that there's an archive in Iowa City, the LGBTQ Iowa Archives and Library, that was actually founded in 2020. So when I had Googled it last summer, it was essentially brand new. It just opened. And this is a space that is not affiliated with the university. It's a nonprofit off campus completely. But I found out that it was actually being run by a history PhD student at the University of Iowa. So I had his email address, and I emailed, his name is Aiden, and here's a photo of me and Aiden at the actual archive space in the library. And Aiden and I talked about my project and how I wanted to do community engagement for my final project somehow. And I pitched an idea to him, and he liked it, and we worked together on it. And this is how my community engagement project was born. It was called the Queer Iowa Narratives Project. So the way this worked in my class was that in groups of 4 to 5, students chose a topic that related in some way to Iowa City's unwritten queer history. And then they conducted archival research. And then they ended up finishing the product by writing a narrative about that story. And this is a narrative they wrote. It's a like 4 to 5 page narrative that is housed on the archive's website, or will be uploaded there. So the point of this is that it's a public facing accessible document that tells a narrative about this local queer history that simply hasn't been recorded anywhere else. So as a few examples, one group wrote about a women-only restaurant called Grace and Ruby's that ran from 1976 to 1978. So it has a pretty short history. So there's not a lot recorded about it. Unfortunately, they had to close because they couldn't afford to stay open and handle their legal fees, because a lot of men in the community were suing them for being discriminatory by not allowing men in their space. There was a queer issues newsletter called Better Homes and Dykes that ran from 1972 to 1982. And fortunately, the University of Iowa archive, the library's archive, had the entire run of that newsletter, yet nobody had written a narrative about it or recorded its history. So my students were able to access that. And then finally, another example, there's a queer activist performance group called the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, and they're famous now in San Francisco, California. They're well known. But what's not well known is that they actually formed in Iowa City. And in part of their research, my students found a book that's all about them, a history of the sisters. And for some reason, the book, chapter 1 starts in San Francisco, right? So we learned through interviews and through letters that they actually started in Iowa City, and that as their name implies, they're the sisters, they dress up in nuns' habits, and then they go out on the street and do activism. So we found out from our interviews that they got their nun habits from Iowa. They went to a local convent and said they were putting on a performance of The Sound of Music, and they needed nun habits. And they were given the habits, and then they didn't put on a performance of The Sound of Music. Instead, they took to the street to do queer activism. So that story had not been recorded, right, in any kind of public facing way. So we recorded that story. Mm-hmm. And so this project had students use materials from both the LGBTQ Iowa Archive and the University of Iowa Library Archive. They sometimes had to go back and forth between the two. So for example, the Better Homes and Dykes newsletters were in the archives, but then they would go to the LGBTQ Iowa Archive and they would find personal correspondence from the editors of the newsletter, and they'd read that. And then they were able to flesh out a fuller narrative about it. So this project was obviously done for an English course, but I think that it's the kind of project that could be done outside of an English classroom, and something like a Sigma Tau Delta chapter could research a local community archive. Community archives are very important, and I think they're kind of, they're not very well known usually. So I think finding a local community archive or a historical society, things like that, there are places that I think would welcome having contributions by our students to help have a new tab on their website with narratives written out or anything like that. So some takeaways I had from the project. I mean, the first, I think, is that I think it's great to do any kind of community activism and service, including things like, you know, beach cleanups or Habitat for Humanity. I did those things in college. But I think a project like this is actually really great because it lets our English students use their skills as researchers and writers to make a permanent contribution to the community. So while those types of services I mentioned are really important, I think there's a very wide range of students who could do that kind of work. I don't think that every student in the whole university is equally capable of writing a really strong narrative, right? But our English majors are. So I think a project like this that really capitalizes on those skills is a really great project to keep in mind. Another thing that I thought was important was the way that this project bridged the university and the community archives. So as I mentioned, there were documents that were available in one and not the other. And we had very explicit discussions about that, right? Which kind of leads to another point of it highlight the importance of archival spaces outside of the institution, right? So there were materials that the University of Iowa doesn't want in their archives. Maybe they're like physical objects that they don't want to house. They don't have like the money or the space to put there, or maybe for political reasons, there are certain things they don't want in the institution, but also that most of the stuff in the institution is behind a paywall, whereas the LGBTQ Iowa archives is completely open to the public. So we talked a lot about the difference between the spaces, but also the way that they work together, right? The way that students can use both to make a project. This project also really helped my students feel more connected to the local community. And I know this will be dependent on your campus and how much your campus is a part of the community. At the University of Iowa, the university buildings are just in the middle of the city. Just like you're in the Iowa City and you're also at the university at the same time. You're always like kind of in both. And when I started this project, my students, I told them we're doing, we're going to record queer Iowa City history. And they were like, what history, right? They didn't think there was any. And it just so happens that, right, this was specific to my class, but it turns out that of my 23 students, 21 of them on day one identified as queer and said, right, we don't have queer history in Iowa. Like, what does that look like? And of course, by the end of the project, they knew that we did have it, right? And they felt much more connected to the community. And I think this is always a worthwhile thing to do to help our students feel connected to the cities they're living in while they're at school. And then finally, this also was great, I thought, because it gave students a really tangible final product. So it was the kind of community service work where at the end of it, they are going to have now a published narrative on the website that they can link to, that they can share with others, that they can show the work they did with their community engagement. So here's just a final photo of my students. This was spring 2020 was, or 2021 was we were of course dealing with COVID, and the university was not having in-person classes, but my students met up for a final kind of party day to celebrate our narratives being published, and this was our photo. And there's my information if anyone wants to get in touch, talk about this project or these ideas.
Thank you so much. So does anyone, I mean, we're going to have lots of time for discussion, but does anyone have any questions specifically for Dr. Bruno? Diane, do you have a question?
I have a really specific question. About how many students in the class were also Sigma Tau Delta chapter members? Was there a pretty much of an overlap, or was it like a partial overlap? How did that work?
I'm not too sure. The University of Iowa Sigma Tau Delta chapter is not very active, if I understand correctly. Yeah, like when I was there, I was always looking out for like posters and things about Sigma Tau Delta to see how involved they were. Yeah, I think we don't have a very involved chapter. So I'm actually not too sure about the overlap there.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you. What? Okay. It's very awkward because now I can't see. Does it? Oh, and Alan, you had a question.
Yes. Hi, my name is Alan Warren, and I'm from Ball State University. I was wondering if this project involved any oral history aspects of any asking local residents about their histories, or going just beyond like what was written in the archives.
Yes, it did. So I actually had that built in as almost a requirement of the project at first. I was hoping that all of the projects would include interviews and include direct quotes with people living in Iowa City. Unfortunately, there were a few that were just really, really hard to find. So for example, one group was researching, there were gay farm collectives in Iowa, like outside of Iowa City. in a certain period in like the mid-century that there were people who were just like living on farms, and they were like queer farms, and they did all the work together and everything. And we just could not, we found a bunch of names in the archival materials. We couldn't trace a single person who was still in Iowa or who we could contact. So that article unfortunately didn't have one, but actually most of them did. They had direct interviews. The students conducted the interviews themselves over Zoom or in person if possible, and then put the interview transcripts into their narratives selectively, right? So yeah, that was a part of it. And we did also have, there were a couple who had already oral histories recorded in the University of Iowa Library archive, so they could listen to those tapes and include that information as well.
That's fascinating. I was really curious because I'm an undergraduate researcher with an oral history project here in Muncie, Indiana. And so I was just like fascinated by the overlap that I was seeing with your project, what we're doing in our Midwestern town. But anyway, great work.
Thank you.
And again, we're going to have an opportunity to sort of circle back and ask more questions, but does anyone have any questions before we shift to Jessica? Or to Jess, sorry. Okay, thank you so much, Enrico. I really appreciate you sharing about that. That's really wonderful. So Jess, could you talk a little bit about the project that you're working on with our colleague?
Yeah, so I'll just start from the beginning when I took her class. So in the fall of my junior year, I took an English capstone class called Life Sentences, Literature of the Prison. And in that class, we primarily studied memoirs and other autobiographical texts written by formerly incarcerated people and currently incarcerated people. And with each book or article or even poem that I read, I really discovered the power of words in that class and the importance of liberating the institutionally silenced and neglected voices of the incarcerated population. And I understood the ways in which writing and artwork or other forms of expression that emerges from carceral facilities like jails and prisons, they challenge the dehumanizing labels that too often suffocate the people behind bars. So on the outside, a lot of people consider incarcerated people as dangerous or violent or criminals, but when you read their writings and you hear their stories, those labels kind of go away, and you understand that these are human beings who are experiencing immense suffering, and their writing functions as an outlet of healing, really. So this class really just showed me, the emancipatory nature of literacy, because reading often grants them knowledge they were never intended to have, and then writing enables them to release their suppressed voices that are buried deep in the shadows of carceral confinement. So understanding this power of storytelling just really, catalyzed my commitment to helping the incarcerated liberate themselves through the written word. That's kind of like my new philosophy. So my professor of this class, she's been teaching a memoir writing workshop at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility. It's the only all-women maximum security prison in New Jersey. And she's been teaching a memoir writing course there for about 20 years. It might be over 20 years. And in that class, the women use writing as an outlet to heal. They write about their past, they write about their current confinement, and they really use it as a way to kind of sort through their emotions and heal and liberate themselves through, the written word. So during winter break, after I took this course, my professor reached out to me and said, I have a project I want to work on. Are you interested? Let's Zoom. And I was like, yeah, of course. So we Zoomed, and she wants to publish one of the memoirs of the women from the class that she's been teaching. So her name is Jamie, and she's serving a life sentence plus 40 years without parole. So these women specifically in this class, they're considered lifers, or people who might never get out or are serving decades in prison. It's not just like a short-term sentence. So Jamie's been incarcerated for decades, since 1994. And since January, I've been writing to her, and I've been helping. It's more like editorial work. So I'm helping shape her memoir, shape her narrative, editing it. I'll tell her, this idea is really good. We need you to write a little bit more about that. So the book is essentially all her writing, but I'm just helping her kind of outline it and frame her narrative and see what we need more of or what we're going to cut, things like that. So I've been writing to Jamie for months, and it's just been amazing. It's an amazing experience. And then my professor also invited me to go teach with her in the prison. So I went 2 weeks ago at this point, and I met 25 women who are also serving really long sentences, most of them. And we taught, the class is called Woman is the Word. And it's basically using writing as a form of empowerment. So we did a bunch of activities. We brought in a poetry packet. we each taught a poem, and the women, we just gave them space to express themselves, what they thought the poem was. We had some writing activities, and it's all about healing. It's, you know, that we kind of frame the writing activities about healing. And for my birthday this year, I held a fundraiser because I wanted to buy books for people in prison. So I did on Instagram like a fundraiser, and I raised over $700. And with that money, I was able to buy a bunch of materials to bring it into the prison with me. And my favorite thing I brought were dictionaries, because I read Malcolm X's text in this capstone class, and I learned about how he taught himself how to read essentially while behind bars by studying the dictionary. So I was like, this is perfect. So I bought each of them like a pocket dictionary, and they were just so grateful. And they surprised me, and they made a card, and it said, "Dear Jess, thank you for the dictionaries." And they all signed it. And you could just tell how much it meant to them, because this is like their lifeline, you know, education, reading and writing, that's their lifeline when they don't have anything else behind bars. So that was really special. So yeah, that's kind of the work I'm doing with the prison. And I'm planning to get my PhD after undergrad. And I want to frame my studies around carceral studies, education, literacy, but all in the terms of incarceration. So yeah, that's kind of the work I'm doing.
I want to share for just a really quick second. I'm putting 2 links into the chat. Professor Charter has, you know, if there's anything that can be described sort of as her life's work, it's definitely this project. And so the first link that I just put in from our local newspaper writes about a film that was made in collaboration with one of our faculty who is in our arts and communication department. And the second link that you can save is a broadcast of this film that was on the public broadcasting station in New Jersey on a show that profiles legal issues. It's a show called Due Process. Your campuses can actually license this film to be shown on campus. But the main reason I want to bring this up is that, you know, we're talking about chapter service and chapter community engagement. And one thing that we often think about with chapter engagement and chapter service is that we have to do something that's off campus. And one of the things that I would like to encourage you all to think about are opportunities that you can serve on your campus. And I always joke with people that the reality is that I probably am just a frustrated cocktail party hostess. So the kinds of activities that I really want my students to host are celebrations. And so I think that the one thing that we've done as a chapter that I have appreciated and enjoyed much more than almost any activity that we've ever done is that we hosted a premiere. So we checked out the sort of small theater on campus, and we hosted a premiere of this event. We weren't able to get a real red carpet for it, but we tried. But it was a great opportunity to do something that had a little touch of glamour. You know, we invited the representatives from the governor's office. We invited our campus board of trustees. We invited the superintendent of New Jersey prisons, who actually came to the event. And so it wound up being something that was really, really high profile and involved people throughout the entire institution. And one of the things that was a great consequence of this is that we had a couple of students who said, can you actually do this for a living? And so we wound up having 3 students who went to graduate school and got degrees in arts planning and management. And all 3 of them wound up working in development at major institutions. And so, you know, there are lots of things that you can do in terms of community service that can serve in an activist role, like Jess was talking about really showing the emancipatory possibilities of literacy, or that can serve a community in the sense of providing evidence of a record of social history. But you can also serve your community by celebrating people in your community and raising the profile of people locally. So, you know, that's something that I recommend that, you think about opportunities to do. Do you guys have any questions for Jess, since I cut off that opportunity by talking about a big party? Do you have any questions about the project or about the work she's doing?
Jess, I think you should say a little bit more about the prison itself, which has really been in the news because it's a horror.
Yeah, so this prison is actually being in the process of shutting down. So Governor Murphy declared that the prison is shutting down because of the rampant sexual abuse that's going on, perpetrated by the guards against the women in the prison, both male and female guards. And so the prison is in the process of shutting down, but the problem is there's no end date, there's no plan in place in terms of how it's shutting down, where the women are going. And again, it's the only all women security prison in New Jersey, and you can't, it's illegal to have co-ed prisons. So they don't know where these women are going. And Jamie writes to me all the time about her anxieties about it because everything's so up in the air, everything is so uncertain. She doesn't know when she'll be picked up and taken away, and who knows where she's going. And Governor Murphy did say it's a multi-year process, which is problematic because Jamie said this just gives the guards more time to torture them because now they're retaliating because they got caught. And Jamie compared it to the crisis on Rikers Island in New York with that jail, because that jail has been supposed to shut down 10 years ago. So when people in power say things are shutting down and they don't have a plan, that erects more problems, which is what's going on now at Edna. So
Yeah.
Okay, so we can, let questions percolate. You can always put them into the chat. So Diane, could you talk about the service project that our chapter has had as a kind of ongoing local service project?
Okay. The chapter here at the College of New Jersey has had for many years a relationship with the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen, and my goal is that every year we have a donation that goes to the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen. And this isn't a way of sort of dissing other soup kitchens. I mean, there are a lot of food support groups in the area, but we just sort of started with Trenton Area Soup Kitchen, and so we've kept with Trenton Area Soup Kitchen. I think a lot of TCNJ students are a little uneasy about the relationship between the college and Trenton. And that, I mean, the college is close to Trenton, but some people have been taught to be afraid of Trenton. And so just sending people once a year down to the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen with a car full of donations, they come back very sort of reassured that Trenton is not a combat zone or third world country. And that's kind of sad. But we've done various and sundry things in the past. One of the most successful has been a toiletries drive, that the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen has a strong need for soap and shampoo and razor blades and toothbrushes and toothpaste, things that you don't even think about not having access to. Some of our best supporters of this have always been people's moms. So I really miss the in-person induction ceremony because I was able to send out information to people's mothers saying that we were doing this toiletries drive and that people's mothers could show up at the induction ceremony with all of these things. And I think that America owes women a great debt of gratitude for the help that they give the community in very many cases. But we've done all kinds of things. Once we did a poetry reading in which everyone was supposed to come with a can of soup. So that there's various and sundry ways to get things for the soup kitchen. But it has been a project that we've been sort of ongoingly committed to. And right now there is a bin in Bliss 129. If you have a spare tube of toothpaste or a bottle of shampoo, you can just drop it off. There are other things that we have started doing as well. About 5 years ago, Sigma Tau Delta started an ongoing relationship with the Dolly Parton. I would just say Dolly Parton. She has a literacy support charity that she runs out of Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, that has a very high national focus, and it enrolls children and for 12 years, they get sent one book a month that's age appropriate. So at the end of this, these children and to have 144 books in their home library. Many of these kids have no books in their homes when it starts. So every year for the last 4 years or so, our chapter has sent enough money to support the books for one child. And that's something that we have done on an ongoing basis. We obviously do other service projects as well. And sometimes the service projects, the best ones are suggested by members. We've had students who wanted to work with the Trenton Public Library. We've had students who wanted to help with the Mercer County Library book sale right here in Ewing. And technically, I would argue that the Ewing Public Library is walking distance to the TCNJ campus if you're not a wuss. I mean, it's like a 1.1 miles. That's not too far to walk. We have had some ongoing volunteer opportunities at Antile because our program assistant in English has been on the Antile PTA for years. And so an Antile is definitely walking distance to the TCNJ campus. It's practically softball throwing distance from the TCNJ campus. And so sometimes students are going to Antile to help with literacy events, to help with reading, read alouds, to help with decorating for school events and school like the science fair and things like that. One of our favorite service projects, after Sandy, one of our members who lived in a shore community, I think it was Lavalier, the only school in her town was completely destroyed by Hurricane Sandy. And by completely destroyed, all that was left in the school were the exterior walls. They lost every book, every piece of paper, every eraser and dry marker and crayon because they'd all been ruined by the flood. And so we were able to raise a lot of money for school supplies and donated school supplies. And for the rest of the academic year, the children were going to school off the island in the basement of a church on the mainland because the school had been so damaged, and we were able to give a little bit of support. One of the things that I've always tried to do, and it's very selfish, is do service on campus that raises the profile of Sigma Tau Delta. It's been one of my goals to have Sigma Tau Delta be the most well-known honor society on campus. So that even if people are not in English, they know that Sigma Tau Delta is the English Honor Society. And so I make it known that Sigma Tau Delta will use their budget to co-sponsor events. So if you're having an event and it's vaguely related to English and you don't have enough money to supply people with cookies and tea, well, we'll chip in some money so that we can be a co-sponsor on your posters. And we will use our email list to try to get people to come to your event. We have an ongoing relationship with people who are connected to admissions and recruiting. And that's something I really like. I get an email from someone who says, do you know any students who'd be willing to talk to on a Zoom link to potential future students about study abroad? And of course I do. And so that Sigma Tau Delta gets its profile raised on campus because we are co-sponsoring events, because we are supplying volunteers. The second week of the academic year, the English department put together a book fair, and we have a lot of people as part of the sort of great retirement movement that happened as a result of the pandemic. We ended up with a lot of people leaving TCNJ and saying, I don't have room to take my books with me. And so the department chair came up with this idea of let's have a book fair. And the deans paid to rent a tent for 2 days. And there was something like 20 to 30,000 books donated to the book fair. And all of the books were free to students. So the books were just let out there and students could just arrive and take books home with them. When I found out about 2 days before the event that the program assistant in English, her plan for putting all those books out was to arrive 2 hours early with 3 student workers. And so I put out a call. We ended up with 12 Sigma Tau Deltans showing up to help move the books. And I don't think the books would have ever gotten out there without those 12 volunteers. But that kind of, if Sigma Tau Delta is the organization that people say, gosh, something needs to happen, can we count on Sigma Tau Delta? You really raise your profile. When I go to the dean and to the provost in the spring and say, I'm taking X number of students to convention and it's going to cost me $9,000, they usually say yes. And they say yes because our profile has been raised on campus. So everything I can do that makes Sigma Tau Delta more visible. And I think Dr. Steele is right when she says service doesn't have to be outside the college community. It can be inside the college community. One of the things I'm trying to brainstorm now is what are we going to do about the fact that students arriving brand new to the college right now haven't been in an ordinary classroom for 18 months. And can we help with that transition? We're sponsoring an event on Tuesday night that we call Inside Scoop for freshmen and sophomores to just come and meet with upper class students and talk a little bit about college. What are their questions? What kind of courses might they be interested in? What kind of paths should they be taking? What's the story that they want to hear about their experiences at TCNJ? So that's my 2 cents worth. I do think that that raising your organization's profile on campus is a good thing.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Caitlin, I don't know if Caitlin's still with us. Caitlin was formerly our student advisor for Sigma Tau Delta and has been involved in just about every level of Sigma Tau Delta from being, I think I first met Caitlin when, Caitlin, I think you were a junior in
I
college.
started coming when I was a sophomore, and then I was the Eastern Region rep as a junior, senior, and then the student advisor. So been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm taking out the spotlight, the spotlight view of people so we can sort of talk more openly. But you had posted a link in the chat. I don't know if people got to see it, but you mentioned that that there was a project that was similar to the one that Jess and Dr. Charter are working on. Do you at IUP, which is Indiana University of Pennsylvania? Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, sure. It's similar, but also like almost exactly different. My advisor and dissertation chair is actually using literature to help in police training. So she's kind of working on the opposite end of the spectrum, and she goes into local prisons and runs a workshop with the prison guards, where she asks them to read set pieces of literature to help them think about how we can combat police brutality and those systemic issues that we've seen happening so much lately. And so she has been working on that for probably 5 or 6 years now, and just in the past year or two has started finally implementing the program. And she, that link you'll see, she's been featured on some local news channels, and has gotten a lot of really positive press out of doing this. So.
Right. Now IUP is just outside of Pittsburgh. Is that?
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half outside of Pittsburgh.
Right. So Jess has also worked with a professor in criminology. So I think it would be really, if you could share and bookmark that link and share it with.
Oh, I'll definitely send it to him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. I mean, one of the great things about Sigma Tau Delta is not only sort of sharing ideas, but sharing projects and potential partnerships. One of the other things I wanted to share in the link is just a sort of reminder for all of you that on November 8th is the deadline for scholarships, but it's also the deadline for chapter project grants. And so if your campus is working on projects that include multiple participants of your local chapters, you're eligible for that. And the chapter grant is a 2-part grant. You get half of the grant initially with an initial award, and then the other half of the grant comes at the end when you have sort of given people some information about how your project turned out, right? And these projects can do anything in terms of serving the mission of the course. And just Caitlin, did you already see that Professor Steinberg gave you an assignment? So, but I think that would be wonderful, right? It would be wonderful to talk about these kinds of research from opposite points of view, right? What are the opportunities for emancipatory and empathetic literacy? See, I even gave you I even gave you a roundtable title. And maybe we could get Dr. Tarter to come to the convention.
Ooh, ooh,
That
ooh.
would be fun. We haven't gotten her, we haven't dragged her along quite yet. But you know, what questions do you have for, oh, and so the chapter deadline, make sure that you look at that chapter project deadline in the link. What other questions do people have for our speakers or for me or for Caitlin and talking about service? Alan, thank you very much for your question earlier, but we have some other participants, Sarah and Mary and Avina and Albie. Do you guys have any questions? Or do our speakers have any questions for one another?
Gosh. I do, Caitlin, are you submitting to the convention already?
I submitted a paper.
Oh,
I have
good.
not submitted a roundtable, but
Yeah. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Yes,
if you
yes, you
and
do.
yes, you do.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I honestly think that the work that you're doing and the work that Jessica's doing, or the work that you know about, like, it's not really your work though, is it, Caitlin? It's her work.
Right. Well, I'm doing another project, but I won't talk
Okay.
about that here, but I do have a connection.
Oh,
So
good. Okay. Well, I think that service projects roundtables at the convention can be really, really interesting, and that they can really fire people up to make them think about literacy in new and different ways. And this is something that's really dear to me because I'm a great believer in the power of narrative, and and I'm not trying to put down the work of sociologists and political theorists and philosophers and historians, but that often when social justice happens, and it happens because somebody's heart or mind has been changed, and that happens really powerfully through literacy and through stories and through narrative, so that I don't think we should underestimate the power of what we do to really improve people's lives. It may not be the same thing as being a person who studies political history and political movements, but it can be just as powerful. So, and I look at, I mean, I'm going to circle back to Enrico there. I'm astonished by your statistic that 21 of your students at the beginning of the semester thought that there was no history of themselves in Iowa City. And that's because they had been written out of it. They had been ignored and overlooked, and that their materials were not stuck in the university's archives where they could be easily accessed and studied, but in a little private archive that didn't even open until 2020.
Well, we have two more sessions, just to kind of go back and we have two more sessions, one at 12 on chapter activities, where Albie, Avina, and I will be talking about different kinds of things to get your chapter doing to promote the chapter as well as to promote recruitment. And then there is an ask your regent anything session at 1 o'clock. Also, though, if you know people who are interested in putting together roundtables and are looking for people, this is a good opportunity to sort of have a chance to play matchmaker. So those two sessions are forthcoming. So I hope that you all stay on and that we can meet and keep talking. Although, Dr. Bruno, you probably have papers to grade as many of the others of us do as well. But thank you again so much for participating, and thank you to our speakers. It's impossible to clap in this circumstance, but then we'll be back at 11 for the next session. So thank you, everyone.